We will call to order the special board meeting for the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. Good morning. My name is Marisol Hernandez. I'm the chairwoman. Seated to my left is Commissioner William. To my left is Commissioner Jonathan Swain. Commissioner William Cressy is not in yet. Next item on the agenda is the consideration of the agenda. Any proposed changes? If not, we'll proceed with approval of the minutes. I don't believe we have any minutes. So we will go on to the Executive Director's report. Mr. Goff.
Madam Chairwoman, I think we need to go right to the old business, electronic poll books.
That's perfectly fine. And we will proceed to old business. Infrastructure projects and changes in election administration. I don't think we have anything related to that. And so we will proceed to the electronic poll books, electronic systems and software report on matters relating to its recent exposure of voter data files. And is anyone here from ES&S? Could you please state and spell your name and your title?
My name is Tom Burt. Last name is spelled B-U-R-T. And I am President and CEO of Election Systems and Software.
Judd Ryan, Regional Vice President of Sales. Jane D.B. R-Y-A-N.
My name is Adam Carbolito. It's A-D-A-M. Last name is C-A-R. B-U-L-L-I-D-O. I am Vice President of Product Development at ES&S.
Vice President of?
Product Development.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And as you know, on Friday, August 11th, our web security expert with the company UpGuard found what appeared to be computer files containing Chicago voter registration information. Then, on Saturday, August 12th, after the file was completely downloaded by UpGuard, a representative from UpGuard alerted state and local agencies of the data. The Chicago Board of Elections received an email at about 5:37 p.m. on Saturday, August 12th, asking about the file. The board was told that the file was on an Amazon Web Services server. Based on that information and based on a review of a sampling of the data, the election board staff quickly determined that the file was one used with our electronic poll books, which are managed by the board's vendor, ES&S. The board staff alerted ES&S of the data exposure, and by 9:44 p.m. that same Saturday evening, the server in question was shut down. The election board, as I stated, quickly determined that the issue did not involve any systems on its websites or servers, which are directly managed by the election board. No computer network systems or websites directly managed by the Chicago Election Board were exposed at any time. The board's websites do not contain any personal identifying information such as dates of birth, partial social security numbers, driver's license numbers, etc., because the Board of Election recognizes how sensitive that information is and that we do not want any data exposure or data breach. Nevertheless, there was a problem with ES&S, and so we have asked you to come here and answer questions about how the data was exposed, the subsequent investigation, and what steps are being taken and will be taken to make certain that something like this is never repeated again. So at this time, I would like to know if you have a statement before we start asking questions.
Sure. Madam Chairwoman, again, my name is Tom Burt, President and CEO for ES&S. First of all, I want to apologize to the entire Board of Elections for the City of Chicago. We know this has caused a great deal of distraction and unnecessary work, and it was our mistake, and we sincerely apologize to the board and to the registered voters of the City of Chicago. I'll give a brief summary of kind of what happened, and then we'd be glad to take any questions. Essentially what happened was when we set up the folder on Amazon Web Services, we set it up with the wrong security settings. We set it to, failed to set it to a private setting. As you stated, Madam Chairwoman, as soon as we were notified that this gentleman had identified the data out there and downloaded it, we immediately took the servers offline. That occurred on a Saturday. By Monday, we had hired a private security firm by the name of CrowdStrike to begin a forensic analysis to try to determine what happened. CrowdStrike's review of the audit log data from the Amazon Web Services server showed several IP addresses that had accessed that Amazon Web Server. All of those IP addresses were known IP addresses from computers utilized by ES&S personnel. The second thing that CrowdStrike did was perform a series of dark web searches to see if in fact any of the data was out there or being offered for sale. All of CrowdStrike's searches on the dark web turned up negative. In other words, there was no trace, no sign of any of the information contained on that Amazon Web Server that was being offered for sale or identified as being in the hands of anybody else. In addition to hiring CrowdStrike, we hired a secondary firm who specializes in dark web searches. So we basically wanted to have two different firms perform searches of the dark web to be sure that that information was not out there. Those searches have all turned up negative, and so both security firms, all of their work, have not identified any trace of this information anywhere on the dark web. So to the best of our knowledge, Mr. Vickery, who was the security researcher who identified this information and downloaded it, to the best of our knowledge, he is the only one who has had gained access to this data.
I guess my first question is, you stated that you used the wrong security settings. How long have you had this information?
We were made aware when you were made aware that the security settings were set incorrectly. So we had no prior knowledge that these were set incorrectly.
Do you have any procedures to double check on security settings at ES&S?
Yeah, again, this was a human error, failure both by the individual who set up the folder and by the management team who is supposed to be responsible for ensuring that the work done by their subordinates was done correctly. We've since learned of automatic routines that Amazon Web Services offers to scan for vulnerabilities like this, and that is part of our go-forward plan.
How long have you had this data from the Board of Elections?
Folder, the Amazon Web Services folder was set up in February, I believe February 7th.
So are you saying that since February 7th, the settings were wrong?
Yes.
find that really very devastating and unbelievable for a firm of your size and experience to have this voter registration information that we entrusted to you as our vendor out there exposed without you doing any kind of backup check. I mean, this is pretty horrendous.
It's very disappointing to us, Madam Chairwoman. We clearly failed on this item. I think it is worth noting. We have a very long track record in this industry, 30+ years as a company. We have a strong track record in terms of securing data, voter data, as well as ballot information. This is an extreme anomaly for us as a company. It was very troubling to us, so we share your disappointment. We accept responsibility for the mistake that we made, but I can assure you this is not the usual course of business for us, and that we are doing everything we can, and will continue to do everything we can to ensure that nothing like this happens again in the future.
Mr. Byrd, I have some questions. So what's happened to the employee and the management team that you said dropped the ball?
They have been disciplined. That's not the details of which I'm not able to report today, but they have been disciplined.
Okay. Have you instituted any kind of retraining at all?
Adam, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Retraining?
Yeah, we are going through additional cybersecurity training to make sure folks have the knowledge they need to be able to do their jobs.
Okay.
We do complete routine cybersecurity training, but we're supplementing that now to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure our folks are educated.
But by your statement, you seem to indicate that they may not have had the training previous?
The individual who set up the Amazon Web Services folder set up other folders for other customers correctly. So this was simply a lack of concentration, a lack of focus on the job. This person knew how to do it correctly and failed to execute, unfortunately, in the example of the City of Chicago data.
Why it strikes me, as you stated, that the security settings are manual in nature. Why was there no default to set to the private side?
That's a great question. That is the default for Amazon Web Services. That's the way they built the system. So for any user of Amazon Web Services, you have to take action to make a folder private.
So that seems to beg other questions. Is the service that you're using from Amazon an off-the-shelf product, or is it something specialized in light of the kind of security that needs to be dealt with here?
Yeah, it's their standard S3 bucket, which is their storage folder service. It's not a specialized service tailored to us.
So it strikes me then that we're dealing here with specialized data. One of the things I read on your website is that one of your mottos is to ensure the voter's confidence, and so it troubles me that you guys would begin to go down a path of securing information off a, off-the-shelf kind of product that defaults to being public. What are we going to do to make sure that either we're looking at different platforms that are going to provide the voters confidence and also default to or be specialized towards protecting this data,
Exactly right.
Yeah.
especially as you're testing?
Yeah, there's a number of things we're doing, and I'd already actually planned to do. Prior to this incident occurring, we weren't pleased with the service we were getting from Amazon.
At what point in time were you not pleased?
Through the course of working with them, we just...
How long have you been working with them?
For about a year now. We engaged them just over a year ago.
So September of 2016?
Yeah, approximately that time. I'd have to get an exact date when we started to engage.
That's fine.
them.
And so when did you realize that you were not happy with their service?
I couldn't tell you. It was a culmination of things over time, and then we started to compare Amazon services to Microsoft Azure and Google's cloud services, and we found that Microsoft Azure seems to have built their system with security as the default, whereas it appears that Amazon is insecure by default.
And how was Amazon chosen?
Originally, it was chosen through a selection process where we evaluated the different tools, and we felt at the time that they were the appropriate tool for our needs.
Amazon has a more extensive track record in this field. Frankly, they have more customers. They've been around longer.
And when you say this field, please define that.
In the hosted web services, so being able to put data in a hosted environment. So they are the most common choice among businesses around the country. They have thousands of customers, many of them very large customers. But to Adam's point, our plan is to migrate away from Amazon Web Services to the Microsoft Azure platform, which has a security default. And then beyond that, the expectation is going to be for us to set up routines that automatically scan to ensure that data remains in a secure setting.
Okay, so let's go to that point, because I would like to go back to that question. Can you detail for me your oversight and kind of your checks and balances as it relates to data? Because I find it extremely troubling that, as the chairwoman said, this was on here since February, and this is the first someone else had to identify the fact that it was exposed. That strikes me that there's really no checks and balances with respect to data. So can you detail for us kind of what was done and what you're going to change going forward to give us the confidence that you all can maintain and protect our data?
Up until now, the policy, the checks and balances were manual. In other words, if an individual sets up a folder, it's that manager's responsibility to periodically ensure that those folders are set up with the proper security settings. What we're going to migrate to is a platform that defaults to...
I'm sorry, can we go back? I just want to
Yes.
have clarity.
Yes.
So a person would set up a file, an individual will set up a file, and the manager's job was to check to make sure that those
Correct.
files are set up.
Correct.
What kind of paper trail was there that the manager checked on those things?
Well, in this instance, there was failure. So the
I
paper
understand,
trail-
but generally I'm saying, what track record or what auditing procedures do you have to make sure the manager did what they're supposed to do?
the manager is required to document via email that these checks were done.
Okay?
Yeah. So in this case, it didn't happen. But the more,
In this case, are you speaking to the case of this particular file or this
Correct.
particular employee and management team?
correct, this particular file, as I stated earlier, this employee and this management team set up and routinely checked and validated other folders successfully and failed to do so in this case.
Set up by the same management team?
Correct.
The same employee?
Correct.
So what was so special about this file that prevented it from being evaluated?
You know, in our discussions with the employee and the manager, there were personal circumstances related to this individual that perhaps they were not in the proper state of mind the day they set it up. Again, those are.
That's fine, I understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm going to the checks and balances question, which is a different question. Because we understand, you know, everyone's human, people make mistakes, we get
Yes,
that.
yes.
That's why you have checks and balances,
That's
to make
right,
sure
that's
that
right.
things are not done. So my question to you is if checks and balances were done on all the other files set by this particular employee, why was not a check and balance done on this particular file for this particular employee?
I think that's a question we can't answer because we don't know. And the people that we asked don't know. It's human error, and I think by definition, it's difficult to.
No, let's back up. I'm sorry, I take exception to that. The file being set up improperly, I'll accept you that that's a human error question, or human error issue, as you define. I'm asking about the checks and balances subsequent to that.
Yeah.
If other files set up by this employee and this management team were routinely checked and proven by an audit trail, and this one file was not checked from February 7th until it was identified, that is not human error. And I need to understand clearly what happened in this particular case with this particular file that prevented it from being evaluated along with other files that were done by this management team and this employee.
Yeah. It's a manual check by the manager, and the manager failed to perform the manual check.
So I guess the question becomes, why did the manager fail to check this particular file every single time they were supposed to check the security of the file?
The the procedure is to validate it once. Every time a change is made, so in this case, when the folder's set up, the procedure is to validate after the folder's set up to make sure the proper security settings were set. The manager in this case did not perform that validation.
So the validation is not done periodically to make sure that no changes have been made subsequent to the first validation?
If a change is made, a validation is supposed to be made. There were no changes made in this case. It was set up incorrectly from the beginning.
Okay.
The manager was charged with validating that it was set up correctly and failed to do so.
But then, excuse me, but after it was set up initially, I think what we wanted to be clear about is after that, there was no checks and balances with regards to periodically check this file to make sure it would still withstand security procedures.
Yeah, there were intentions to do quarterly validation checks. Those quarterly validation checks did not happen. But to, I think, the Commissioner's point, we need to have tools in place that take the human element out of this. And that's what we're moving to now, is to automate these validation steps so that, you know, someone can't just forget or get too busy and not get to it or postpone it. We got to have safety nets for these folks so that if they do make a human mistake or if they do forget to do a validation, there's a net there to make sure that, you know, it does get validated and checked. And that's what we've got in place now, and we're going to continue to increase it in the future.
Well, that leads me to ask, what specifically will you be doing, or have you been doing since August 12th, in order to have backup safe controls on the Chicago Board of Elections file?
Yeah, I can walk you through. There's a number of things we're doing. I'll walk you through, and if you guys have questions, feel free to interrupt.
We'll jump in.
I'm sure you will. The first thing we did was did an audit of all access rights and privileges to make sure the appropriate people had the right rights to set permissions and or change permissions. We did end up restricting those privileges to 2 individuals internally and implemented a policy where any changes to those rights or privileges require vice president level approval, and I'm personally monitoring those changes on a weekly basis if they occur. So far,
Sorry, can you go back? I didn't get one thing you said. You said after the audit, you restricted something internally. I missed that.
Yeah, so we made sure that no one in the company besides these 2 individuals had rights to make any permissions changes to expose a folder like that.
Okay.
There's only 2 individuals now who can make that sort of change. And those 2 individuals have to go through, even though they have that right, they have to go through a process to make those changes and get approval. And then I'm, right now, weekly monitoring any changes. There hasn't been any, but I'm checking every week to make sure, hey, let's double check, let's make sure there aren't any changes. So we've implemented that access rights and privileges policies procedure, and that's in place now. In addition to that, we've implemented enhanced logging and notification systems. These are automated tools that will track any activity or any changes in the system, and if anything even appears to be out of sorts, we will get a notification. So if someone were to accidentally change the permissions on a folder or misconfigure a folder, we will get alerts notifying us of that immediately, and we'll be able to make a correction if that should happen. We've also modified our data retention policy. We had been storing this data out of the intent to comply with the 22-month retention policy. It's clear that we don't need to, that's not our obligation. So we're no longer storing any customer data beyond when it's needed, and we're especially not storing any data on the cloud anymore.
So where will you be storing, or where is our data right now?
Well, we've purged all the data, the Chicago data, we've purged and removed. And going forward, any working files that we have will be stored on a secure internal storage location. All data will be encrypted, high-level encryption algorithms, so that, you know, if there is any potential exposure, we've got that additional protection there that the files will be encrypted. We're using the AES 256 encryption for that. But that's our policy going forward. We're just not going to store the data anymore, eliminate that possibility altogether.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. Any Chicago Board of Elections voter registration data that is needed by ES&S will be stored internally and not on any web cloud.
Correct. And encrypted. Yep. Yep.
May I ask, what impact will that have on the use of the electronic poll book?
Should have no impact. I don't foresee any impacts on that. We should be able to get everything done just fine without that in place.
Okay, so with respect to the question of how you're holding the data, this is a policy that you're going to implement for all your clients?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question earlier about the moving from one cloud service to another cloud service, and what I'm hearing is that that's a conversation that's moved at this point. Or you still be using cloud services for other purposes?
Yeah, we're still using cloud services for other services, but we won't be using it for the storage of data anymore.
And that'll happen for all of your clients?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Continue.
To be clear, we still need it for the smart process. There still is an activity on election day.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was getting at, Judd. You want to kind of amplify that?
So there still is a process on election day where the cloud, for lack of a better term, it will be utilized. The process of updating the electronic poll books to reflect anyone who's voted early or absentee, obviously that status change is very important to make sure that nobody votes a second time. So the data will still be out there for the purposes of election day. I think what Adam was referring to is no storage post-election will be done in the cloud. But it is still needed to run those transactions on election day.
So will it be moved from the personal, your personal server to the cloud at one point? Is that what you're saying?
We'll still be using, we'll be using Microsoft Azure cloud service for the running of the application, but not for the storage of backup data. And I think it's also worth noting, we're working with the board right now to eliminate any personally identifiable information that's included in the data that's passed back and forth between the city of Chicago and ES&S, so that that exposure gets eliminated. If by some reason all of these measures fail and someone does get their hands on the data will essentially be useless to them.
Will that data on election day you were talking about, would that be encrypted as well as soon as it?
Yeah, it's passed through, yep, it's encrypted in transit.
So on that file is typically cut Monday evening after the close of early voting the night before the election, and then is then uploaded shortly thereafter. So it's available at 5 a.m. when the poll workers arrive.
When the poll books need to be updated?
Correct.
And then subsequently taken down shortly thereafter?
So that remains active throughout the course of the day to reflect people who have voted and registered.
Sure.
So that they cannot register in another location.
Sure.
After the polls close, the Board of Elections takes a grab of that data, so to speak, to be able to update how many people voted and so forth, and then we take the people who registered on election day and give them to Mr. Charles Holliday to import back into the voter registration system to reflect the people who have voted and registered to vote on election day. After those processes are completed, it can be taken offline that day.
What, I think our Chicago voters are still concerned about this data exposure. Granted, it's nothing like the Equifax data breach, but this exposure was nonetheless very troublesome and very disconcerting. And I, like many other voters, were very upset that this ever happened. How can you today assure our voters that A, you have or are in the process of taking steps to make sure their information has not been released or used? And how can you assure them that this will not occur again?
We're taking a few steps along those lines, Madam Chairwoman. First of all, we're working with the board to issue notifications both on the ES&S website and on the Board of Elections website. There will be notification through the media, and to the extent that the Board of Elections has individual email addresses for registered voters, there will be an email notification to those voters. We have hired Kroll to help us address concern. Part of the notification will be to alert voters, allow them to call a phone number, to ask questions, and also be offered credit restoration services should their credit be impacted in any way. And so Kroll is going to be our main vehicle to support voters should anything, should any of this impact them in a negative way. In terms of assuring them about going forward, I think the answers are all the ones we've given today about all the changes we plan to make to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Can I go back to one question that's still bugging me? And again, I appreciate your lack of willingness to disclose what's happened to the employee, but you said something that really struck me. You said that the employee was not in their right mind.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to.
I understand privacy protections and all that, but
Yeah.
but that statement, I can't let that statement just hang out there. They're not
Well,
in their right mind.
I don't mean to insinuate that they were unfit for work. In responding to your question about why it happened, it's difficult for me to get inside a person's head and understand why in one instance they execute a task correctly and in another instance they execute a task incorrectly. And so in speaking with the individual, they offered reasons about perhaps why they were distracted, but they were basically, Commissioner, there wasn't a good explanation. They messed up, they knew it, and so it'd be difficult for me to really give you a precise answer as to why that individual made the mistake.
Okay, so there was no situation, I guess more specifically, wasn't a situation of intoxication or drug abuse
No,
or anything of that
absolutely
nature?
not, and I apologize if
Okay,
if
so I just
that's
wanted to clarify the point.
Yeah, no, and I thank you for giving us the opportunity to clarify. Nothing along those lines, more along the lines of being distracted and not really being able to describe why.
Well, I just, one thing, I do not want that individual or anybody who was on the team who was responsible for failing to follow up on our information to be working on our project. And I hope you have made adequate personnel changes, that we have the persons who are the most qualified, most responsible persons will be handling our voter registration information from now on.
We have made those personnel changes, Madam Chairwoman. The individuals who were involved with this mistake are no longer working on anything related to the City of Chicago, and we do have very qualified individuals to step into their place to handle this correctly going forward.
As I said, we at the Board of Elections try to take every precaution to not put any of our voters' personal information on the web. And because we recognize how sensitive that information is, and we have 1.8 million people, and hopefully many more, that entrust that information to us in order to vote. And we want people to vote. So it is of the utmost importance that we at the Board of Elections and all our vendors subscribe to that same policy and belief. We're still in the process of investigating and assessing, I think, the facts, getting more information, and determining what other steps and procedures we should take and we would want you to take. So we will be working with you on this, but let me say this without any hesitation and as clearly as possible. We expect you as our vendor to act with the highest integrity, highest competence, and respect and protect the information we entrust to you. There will be severe repercussions and consequences if we learn of anything else. And as I said, this is not the end. We're still evaluating and assessing what we need to do and further action.
I'd echo the chair's comments. I have one other comment I'd like to make. Through this conversation, it strikes me that prior to this incident, there may not have been the appropriate reverence, for lack of a better word, of sensitive data. Some of these questions that we have asked, or that I asked, with respect to, why was it manual? Why was there no automatic default? Why would you choose someone that, that kind of line of questioning? The answers to me were not satisfactory. That in today's day and age, if you're dealing with people's, you wouldn't open a bank and leave the bank vault open, and you wouldn't choose a bank that had left the bank vault open for anyone to walk in and be able to look at all the money. These assets are just as valuable, if not more valuable, than any dollars that may be in the bank or in the safe deposit box. And so it strikes me that it may not have been the appropriate reverence for what you were entrusted with. And so I would encourage you and hope that going forward, that not only for you are a large election service provider in the country, and yes, this happened on your watch to our data. But I'm concerned also about the data of other voters that may be entrusted in your charge. So, more specifically about Chicago, but all that may be entrusted to your charge. So I would hope that as a leader of your company, that you would engage in a culture change from top to bottom about how data is protected and how data should be protected, how the checks and balances should be done to make sure that these things are not, done again. At the end of the day, what the business that you are in and the service that we provide is at the fundamental crux of our democracy. And then when that gets eroded, a whole lot more gets eroded. And so I would encourage you to take that level of concern with respect to this. So that's my comment.
First of all, I apologize for arriving late. And I appreciate you gentlemen being here today, and I appreciate how promptly you responded to the notification of this exposure, and I appreciate the way our board personnel responded so promptly to this. But the big question I have is, and this may have been covered already, to date, is there evidence indicating that the information that was exposed has gotten out to any unauthorized parties other than the investigator who initially found it, or has been brokered anywhere on the dark web or deep web?
There has been no evidence. I described earlier with Commissioner Cressy that we hired 2 different firms to perform extensive searches of the dark web. Neither of those efforts have yielded a trace of the data or the data being offered for sale.
And you have fairly good confidence that that is going to be the situation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further questions or comments. I think this concludes our questions for you. Thank you for coming. And as I said, this will be the last of many more conversations, questions, discussions, and further decisions as to what is going to happen.
We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you, and of course we'll make ourselves available going forward should we need to have further discussions on anything related to this matter. So thank you for letting us be here today.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is new business. Is there any new business? No. And Mr. Lasker, is there a legal report?
Not
Is
today.
there? There is no financial report. We did not receive any public comment requests. And I don't believe we have executive session scheduled. As a result, I would entertain a motion to adjourn until our next regularly scheduled meeting, which will take place on September 26th at 9 a.m. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.